Syrian troops have retaken more than two-thirds of eastern Aleppo from rebel forces, and battles are now raging for control of the historic old city. Well, the district's marked in green here. That's all that's left under the control of the rebels. The area circled in red is the area where battles are now unfolding. Facing defeat, the militants have intensified attacks on civilian areas. Here's how the situation has been developing throughout the week here on our news wall. On Monday, a mobile hospital set up by Russian medics came under rebel fire. The paramedics were killed and one doctor was seriously injured. Well, shelling on residential areas has been relentless. On Tuesday, 7 people were killed and dozens wounded in an attack. Now, the rebels are being pushed from central Aleppo. Following the offensive, scores of civilians who have been trapped in the rebel-held districts for years were able to cross into government-held areas. Now, as the battle in Aleppo continues, RT's Gaine Chichikan gauged American reaction to it.
Washington is not happy at the prospect of the Syrian government's taking control of eastern Aleppo. The U.S. has supported the rebels there, even as they partnered with al-Nusra, which is al-Qaeda in Syria, and they are now losing ground.
It's only going to exacerbate the ongoing conflict, that the opposition is not going to lay down their arms, but is going to continue fighting.
Behind the scenes, some U.S. officials see the retaking of eastern Aleppo as a defeat for President Obama, who 4 years ago said Bashar Assad's days were numbered.
I am confident that Assad's days are numbered.
Reuters has quoted an unnamed U.S. official as saying,
"Who won? Putin, the Iranians, and Assad. Who lost? We did, and Jordan especially, the Saudis and Gulf states."
Jordan is where the CIA trained and armed rebels, while the Gulf states provided funding for them. Notably absent from the U.S. officials' list of losers is al-Nusra.
Do you think, though, the retaking of eastern Aleppo would be a defeat for al-Nusra?
Look, we're all about defeating al-Nusra. We agree on that. Russia and the United States are in agreement that Nusra is a terrorist organization and needs to be dismantled and destroyed, much like Daesh does. But we have not seen that Russia's focus has been on Nusra. It's been on helping the regime go after the moderate opposition in Aleppo.
The U.S. had for months pledged to separate eastern Aleppo's rebel groups from al-Nusra, unsuccessfully. Now all rebel groups there, as well as the terrorists, have dropped their names and united under the so-called Army of Aleppo.
There's no doubt whatsoever that Western governments have had a ludicrously one-sided view of the terrible conflict, terrible civil war in Syria, and have essentially been backing any force which is fighting the government of President Assad, no matter how Islamist, how extremist that force might be. And now they appear desperate to give the rebel forces in Aleppo a respite, just when, thank goodness, it looks like the fighting there might be coming to a close.
Previously, Washington's reaction to the liberation of the ancient city of Palmyra from ISIL in March by Russian and Syrian forces showed the Obama administration's reluctance to approve of any gains against terrorists if they helped Bashar Assad.
The Syrian people should not have to decide between ISIL and Assad.
The defeat of terrorists has not been the U.S.'s only goal in Syria. For 5 years now, Washington has also rooted for the defeat of Bashar Assad. So the Syrian army's retaking of territory from ISIL and from al-Nusra, with whom the rebels have been aligned in Aleppo, is hardly seen as good news here in Washington. Ganesh Shakyan, RT, Washington, D.C.
Well, the UK has issued a joint statement along with the leaders of Canada, France, Germany, Italy and the United States, condemning the situation in Aleppo and lashing out at the Syrian government and its supporters, especially Russia. We asked the leader of the Belgian People's Party about the wave of diplomatic criticism coming from the West.
I think they're committing the same mistake that we have committed in the West for the last 10 years or 15 years. You know, we have seek change in regime, secular regime in Iraq, in Libya and in Syria, with the result that we see today. We have harmed, we have supported rebels, so-called moderate rebels, armed them, and we have seen that these rebels turn to be, you know, Islamist, worse than of course, the regime in place. So I think, unfortunately, these kind of statements do not help and do not take into consideration, as I said, the reality on the ground. And we should redefine the objective. We can at least define what we really do not want. And we don't want an ISIS stronghold. We don't want a Al-Qaeda stronghold. We don't want even a stronghold for so-called moderate that turn to be ultimately fanatics. So I think that the West, Europe, Western Europe, and the US should adapt to this reality and should change strategic goals.
Meanwhile, a rally has been held outside the Russian embassy in Berlin. The protesters blamed war crimes committed in Aleppo on Moscow and Damascus. It was met by a small counter-protest. The group waved Russian flags and held placards saying, "Thank you for helping to liberate Aleppo."